Hi, welcome back to another video. And this one comes to us from Meg McLean. And she says, I'll start by saying I don't really believe in ghosts. At best, I'm agnostic. I don't think that's quite what that means. But I don't even know what a ghost would look like, so who knows? When I was 8, she is now 40, my mom remarried and we moved to a house next to a cemetery. I could see the closest graves out of my bedroom window. I didn't mind because I didn't believe in ghosts, and it was a beautiful, quiet landscape. One day when I was about 11, I saw an old man in my backyard trimming the bush at the back of our yard. I adored old men, just thought it was a neighbor being kind, so I shot him a smile from my bedroom desk where I was doing my homework. He smiled back and waved, went back to my work. The next day at school, my history teacher, he was from Wales and my favorite teacher ever because he picked up on the fact that I had a British sense of humor, so we bonded, asked me to stay after class. He knew I lived next to the cemetery and handed me a local news article about the groundskeeper having died a week earlier. He assumed I had known the guy and wanted to offer his condolences. The photo from the obituary was of the man I had seen in my backyard just the day before. I had never figured out what the hell had happened. I thought maybe the paper got the date of his death wrong, or maybe the guy had a twin brother who mistook our bush for part of the cemetery while taking over his brother's job. No clue, but I know what I saw, and it was the same man, looking perfectly fine, trimming our bush. I still have no clue what that was. I used to live next to a cemetery too, and that was actually the least haunted house I ever lived in. Seriously, nothing. The worst thing you had to worry about there was rattlesnakes. So the next story is from Autumn Leaves 84. I am currently 39 years old and live in Scotland. The story I'm about to tell happened at the age of 1 to 1.5 years old. When I was just under a year old, my mother's grandfather, Tom, passed away. He had been unwell for a while and suffering from a stroke before he passed away. My mom would take me to visit him and my grandmother daily. He was a family-oriented man, and he adored me. My mother would tell me how much he loved spending time with me and would always tickle me and love the sound of my laughter. About 3 months after he passed away, my mother and father were awakened one night by the sound of laughter coming from my bedroom. When they both entered the room, they found me lying on my cot, rolling around and giggling. They settled me again for the night, not thinking too much about it, until it happened again the following night and each night after there. For the next couple of months this continued, and understandably this started to creep my father out. My mother and her family, on the other hand, started to wonder if perhaps I was being visited during the night. As the weeks passed, I started to tell my mother and father details about my nighttime giggles. Once my speech started to develop, I began to give them clues as to what I was finding so funny in the wee hours of the morning. One night, my parents were woken by the sound of my laughter and could hear me shouting, "Man!" They quickly entered my room to find me standing in my cot, staring at the bed directly across from me. My parents asked, "What is it?" I replied, "Man," pointing to the bed. This continued, but as the weeks went on, the more information I gave, they'd tell me, "Man, tickle me." Or they'd hear me shouting, "Stop tickling me, man." I started to describe him, and they said he had a hat and a ticked old face and pointed above my lip. My great-grandfather, who passed away when I was under a year old, wore a bonnet, a traditional Scottish hat, and a mustache. My family was convinced I was being visited by my late great-grandfather, even my father, who was a skeptic. Once I started to give this information, my nighttime visits and laughter stopped. About 17 years ago, a psychic told me that I have a male spirit with me who looks out for me. He told me he's always been there since I was a baby. His name is Tom. Well, at least that's a good thing. I mean, could be some random weirdo ghost. But at least it's someone who loves you and, is trying to protect you. The next story is from Shy Pale White. Okay, so when my father died, I was 15, and my mother moved in with my stepdad 3 months after my father's death. The house was fine, the orange-colored walls, cute white tiles, everything was normal. But it was nighttime when we arrived, so we just went in quickly, took our bags, and sat down on the couch and rested after the long trip. After an hour, my stepfather went out to buy some food, and my mother went to the bedroom to lie down and scroll through Facebook. I was on the couch listening to music. After a while, my mother called me. I went to the bedroom and shook. She asked me if my stepfather had gone home because she saw someone go past the bedroom. The apartment was small and the living room was square. We only had one hallway, bathroom to the left, bedroom to the left as well, and at the end of the hallway was the kitchen. I said to my mom, "No, he has not come back yet." "Who did you see?" I was hiding my fears. I was extremely scared of ghosts, and I was 100% believed in them. My mother stood up, and she hurried hurriedly ran to the living room and sat down on the couch together with my brother, who wasn't my brother who went past the hallway, as he was always at my side. We were configuring things on what was happening. We calmed down and we just waited for my stepfather to come back. While we waited, the lights started to flicker from time to time. As time went by, the lights flickered intensely, and the feeling in me was weird. I had anger, sadness, and fear. So in conclusion, in order not to get too scared, we believed it was my dead father saying that he was there. So then we had that mindset, everything went back to normal. And my stepfather came back and we told the whole thing, and his reaction? Oh, nothing much. 17 days after that time, we now believe that he was not my father. We took a picture after I was freshly showered, while the picture behind us was on a smart TV. We took a couple of shots, and one terrified us the most. The TV has an additional shadow, instead of 2, which is me and my mother. There were 3. I thought it was my brother again, since the shadow had very long, straight black hair, like it was facing the camera as well. And his hair was reflected on the TV, but my brother was busy playing games on the sofa. I called my stepfather, and we wanted him to explain what was happening. So he explained. That apartment was burned accidentally by one punk boy. The building burned, killing a whole family in that part of the apartment we rented. Baby, sister, brother, mother, father, grandfather, and who knows, are now dead due to the fact of this incident. We were shocked to hear the story, and now we know the recent owner of the apartment does not want us to live there anymore. But not in a safe way. They were protecting their home, not us. So during the days of horror, we lived there for 1 year, overcoming our fear. My mother went so sick living there, and my stepfather became more of an angst father while I was neglected by the ghost. And I thought that I had done a couple of bad sins before, and they might come to consider me the devil of the family. Who knows? They won't get close to me, not like my siblings and parents did. But one time, I was sleeping on my own, and the mini fan in the bed fell, and I was so angry I started shouting about who the fuck fell on my fan on a very hot evening. My parents weren't home. Yet I was not scared. I was still scared. My face in the mirror was different. As if someone were looking at me. The lights were wired, and it feels like I was living in a dream. The objects were always misplaced, and the TV gave me traumas, so I was sick on every occasion too, just like my mom and my brother. He looks weird. He keeps getting pale and dull, just like a ghost, and his attitude is getting a bit violent. I started using salt as protection, hoping that it would work. So I put salt on the bed while I was sleeping, but in the morning, it was in the trash. I swear it was in my hands. Nobody was there. What the fuck? The orange house, I won't be coming back there again. The lights, my dreams, my brother, my mother, my stepfather, the objects, they are all getting scary. It's a heavy feeling, and I would rather die than think about it. But now, I'm still scared of ghosts. It's just that I'm back in my original home, and the ghost I know here is my loving father. So, thanks to the orange house, I'm 50% not scared and 50% scared. I have pictures, but I deleted them due to fear. The memory is scary, and it feels like ghosts will follow me if I keep those pictures. That's a thing. I mean, I guess, I kind of have something like that too. I try not to bring up much evidence, I guess, because, yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. This person has obviously been through a lot and probably needs help in some way, because they sound very distressed. I hope they are getting the help they need. But, yeah. On to the next story. From Lunar Novelist 4. This is a bit of a long post, so please bear with me. It's a true story, one that I don't talk about anymore, but I feel that I should share. When I was 21, the female, my grandmother who raised me passed away from liver cancer. She's been diagnosed before I was 5, but she beat it and went into remission for a long time. We never thought it returned, and watching the strong, confident woman I had known my entire life waste away was nothing but devastating, as one would imagine. The loss of her, as well as my grandfather 2 years prior, took such a big mental toll on me that I had to drop out of college, and thus I returned to my childhood home. It wasn't much, a place my grandparents built themselves in the old dried-out riverbed. 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, never quite finished, and surrounded by the red clay of the countryside. Towering old cedar trees and the kind of folk who are mostly farmers, former miners, and the like. It's a quiet area where nothing much happens, except that when it does. And the death of my grandmother unleashed something from that old land, and even now, almost 10 years later, I am still not sure why this happened. When I came home for the first time in months from college, this unfinished, quaint house had become mine, though, to be honest, I didn't want it. The place no longer felt like the home to me, and without my grandmother, I knew it never would be. It honestly felt like she had never been there in the first place. Her clothes were present, alongside her jewelry items and the lacy white bedding she loved, but her laughter was no longer resounded through the house, and the warmth she exuded was gone as well, leaving the master bedroom cold and the air stagnant. Standing in the big walk-in closet, she had drawn the plans for herself, holding my suitcase. It all felt pointless and hollow. The living color and safety of the house were snuffed out. I felt anxious and gravitated towards her clothes, which hung neatly in the closet. I pulled out one of her favorite pink shirts, bring it to my nose to smell it, hoping that her scent and perfume were still there. I wanted so desperately to have a piece of her with me, to be ingrained in my mind what she smelled like, so I wouldn't forget. But then I brought it to my nose. There was nothing. Even her scent had been erased. It left me feeling even emptier, and for the first time since that night she died, I found myself crying, standing in the closet like I did when I was small, but this time with no idea of what to do with her being gone. My biological mother was staying with me at the time, as was my college roommate and my 3 siblings. However, I never felt more alone. So I stood there, contemplating what to do next, coping with losing someone and grappling with the reality that the cancer that took her is genetic, and myself or someone else could fall victim to it next. To be honest, putting words to everything I felt at the time is kind of difficult. Even now, it's hard. However, I never expected anything like what happened to occur. I can't forget it. I'd gotten a better grasp of my emotions after a few minutes, wiping my eyes and prepared to leave the closet, shutting the door behind me and thinking about what else had to be done when I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, a tall, shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. It was featureless, thin-framed, with clawed hands, and black as night. It exuded the feeling of fear, of misery, the sensation of death that I knew all too well. I decided to ignore it and walked out of the room and shut the door, never once looking up from the ground before I went to my bedroom, where my roommate and sister were. Only then, when they asked me, did I realize how pale I was, but I brushed it off as being fatigue and heartbreak atop trying to ignore my own grieving process to be stronger for my younger siblings, something I'd regret in the coming years. But I didn't mention the shadowy figure, hoping that it was nothing more than my tired brain coming up with whatever it could to make sense out of everything that was happening in the last 2 years. I chalked it up to stress, to the grief, and to the overwhelming sensations that I couldn't name. It was the worst mistake I could have made. In the coming months, things began to change. I noticed the shadow in the room whenever the door was open, so I rarely let it stay that way. Yet sometimes the kids would leave it open, and I would be face to face with the shadow. However, my mom and youngest brother came to where they were sleeping in that room. My roommate and sister shared a room with me, and second, my brother in the third and smallest bedroom. Yet no matter how much I tried to ignore it, something never felt right in that house. It was little things at first, like missing items or small arguments that had happened occasionally. However, they steadily changed into what could only be described as something malevolent. My siblings were telling me how they didn't feel comfortable in the house, like someone was always watching them. My roommate didn't like going into my grandmother's room, and my mom started getting sick. One night, my little brother was going to bed, and it was my job to make sure he went to sleep, since my mother was working the night shift at her job. I put him down and was going to turn to the closet light and shut the door behind us when he sat up in bed and told me not to shut the door. He was around 6, so at the time, so I didn't think much of it. I was an adult and still scared of the dark even today, so I imagined he was too. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. A shadow man will come closer if you shut the door. It terrified me to know that he was seeing it too, but I said nothing, deciding not to give it attention, just as the off chance that it was something more than I'd originally hoped it was. Ghosts weren't uncommon in these parts. Appalachia is rampant with ghost stories, but I suspected it was nothing too serious, because it wasn't the other 2 entities my family had been seeing for decades. A blue doll with red eyes, and a short goblin-like creature with green skin, sharp teeth, and thick, long yellow claws. I'll talk about that another time. A big part of me wanted to think it wasn't supernatural. This was merely a manifestation of the mind, and that the other 2 things we'd seen over the years were the extent of that. But now I was questioning that choice to ignore the other part of me that was warning me not to doubt that I was seeing, and that I needed to be afraid. However, my little brother was scared, and I knew that telling him what I could see too would only make matters worse. Therefore, I got into bed with him and told him not to worry about it, that it was a bad dream. I did what any adult would do for the child, saying that they saw a monster. I pretended it wasn't real, as if only to give him some comfort. Even while I was staring it down, I knew something bad was going to happen if we didn't get rid of it. However, that ended up happening was fixable, if not terrible. Our home was going into foreclosure, and at 22 years old, I was having to cope with losing the house and at the same time wanted nothing more to do with it. Selling the home would have been a benefit, but no one was going to buy it no matter what we did. Each potential buyer fell through time and time again. The arguments were worsening, the monetary circumstances were atrocious, and then one night my mom took my youngest brother to the grocery store with her, leaving us alone for a few hours while my roommate and I tended to the kids. Something had happened when my sister and brother got into an argument. The next thing I knew, I heard a baseball bat collide with the door frame. It was a distinct sound, a heavy, deafening thud that made a chill go up my spine. I was in the kitchen, where I had a clear view of my grandmother's room, when the shadow now stood by the foot of her bed. My sister started screaming and crying, and I panicked. I ran to get between them, and my brother swung the bat at my head. His eyes were wide, almost wild-looking, and his face was twisted in anger. I told my roommate to grab my sister, and I did the only thing I could think of. Told her to take them to my grandmother's closet and lock the door. I pushed my brother back, and we all ran into it. The baseball bat was swung a few more times, but thankfully missed all of us. We locked the door behind us and sat there in the closet on the ground, huddled together, unsure of what had happened. My sister was safe, my roommate was fine, and so was I, but it terrified me to think of what was happening. I called my mom. She came back and talked my brother down, deciding after the ordeal of the night that it was time to get my brother into therapy. But it kept getting worse. The house was always cold. We started packing things to move somewhere because we ultimately lost the house. My mom and I started getting into terrible arguments that were mostly screaming and shouting. She called me things that I knew she wouldn't, and I threw things, hit walls, and started wanting to hurt myself. The shadow kept getting closer to the door. Eventually, everything came to a head, and we went across the street to my great-grandmother's with my roommate. My uncle helped us move, but I didn't want to keep the house, and we stayed at my great-grandmother's for almost a year. During that time, my mom continued to live in the house for a while, often still staying and doing things that weren't normal for her. I didn't speak to my siblings or mother for nearly a year, but things started getting better while I lived with my great-grandmother. I got a job, as did my roommate, and we started saving up money to move into an apartment. My mom finally left the house. We still didn't talk, and my siblings thought I betrayed them. Things were looking up. And then I saw a creature in the hallway at my grandmother's, and so did my roommate. My great-grandmother started telling us that she was seeing things around the house, and I got the worst feeling of shadows across the street. My roommate and I talked about it often, sleeping in the guest bedroom of my great-grandmother's house, sitting in the middle of the night, and because we heard strange noises coming from the hallway that connected to the living room. It made me feel like something bad was going to happen again, and it did. I lost the job because I had a knee injury I sustained a few years prior. My leg would lock up sometimes, and when that would happen, I couldn't move it, and then I would try to take pressure off, and they fired me. It was frustrating, kind of scary even, because it was beginning to feel like I was cursed. Then a light shined through me, being able to sell some property I owned, which got me my roommate and me our first apartment. It was a place in the middle of the not great area of our state, not great from where I'd grown up. The apartment complex was built like townhomes and was income-based. It was cheap and not great. We slept on a blow-up mattress in our living room for the first 4 months, eventually getting a bed from my great-grandmother that I still use today. So my roommate and I shared this room, and my pet chihuahua, who sadly passed away, in the apartment. Things were okay, but not great, but okay. I thought that finally I had put enough space between me and myself and that thing, but I hadn't. It was foolish for me to think that. My dog passing away had nothing to do with this thing. He'd accidentally gotten into some chemicals and passed from those. Blamed pest control for spraying and not even telling me they had come by. And my roommate still had her job, but I no longer did. So I was alone in the apartment. I went downstairs, planning on fixing something to eat and going back upstairs to do some writing and do a bit of work that my therapist had suggested I do. Things were fine, though I was coping with the loss of my dog, whom I viewed as a child. I had bottle fed him and everything, and it hurt. But I was doing all right. Then I saw it again. It was standing in the corner of the living room, but this time I could see better. I made eye contact with the entity, and it smiled. The sight of it made me sick to my stomach, and I fled the kitchen and up the stairs, locking the door to my room behind me. I had a panic attack, and things just spiraled from there. My relationship with my mom was improving, but I was getting worse, having mood swings, panic attacks, anger spells, and outright becoming more and more aggressive. Atop this, having trouble with asthma and body pains. During my time at the apartment, I ended up being diagnosed with fibromyalgia and PTSD. Finally, I suspected the entity was now just a thing that was because of my mental illness, and I started taking medication for it. I was doing okay. I had gotten another dog, whom I still own. She's 6 as of writing the story, and I was making progress on coming to terms with everything that had happened. Yet there was always more to the story, isn't there? My roommate began seeing the entity too, and it was edging closer to the stairwell, evidently coming to stand by the front door and then the stairs. We would run upstairs at night after shutting the lights off, leaving the landing light at the top of the stairs on, and sleep with the TV going at night. It was scary and confusing. Why was it following me? What did it want? I began to question these things, and each night it drew closer and closer to the bedroom. And then one day it finally came inside the room. I had never had sleep paralysis before, but I'd always imagined it was scary. And I was right. It was. The first one I had was on a bright summer day. My roommate was playing a video game, and I was sleeping in because I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. Things were fine until I had a sleep paralysis episode. I woke up from my nap, and my whole body was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink, and breathing was difficult. I knew I was awake because I could hear my roommate playing the game, and my dog was sleeping on the bed next to me. Things were normal, except for the entity now had a face. For the first time in a year, since I had been seeing this thing, I saw what it truly looked like. Tall, emaciated, blackened flesh like it had been burned, long, sharp nails of equal color, thin teeth, and white eyes that bore no pupils or iris. Atop its head were antler-like horns that it crouched to fit into the corner of the room. I stared at it in fear, in panic and doubt, and thinking that it was going to kill me. It smiled, exposing its evil grin that split up its ears to a garish Glasgow grin. I started to believe I was having a nightmare, and the creature was just a figment of my imagination. Then it walked over to me and grabbed me by the throat. It felt corpse-like cold fingers touch my skin and putrid breath that stunk of decay on my face. And then it spoke to me. You will never escape me. I sat up screaming, went into panic mode, and my mental state went downhill, and I considered harming myself again, which I suspected was what it wanted. It hurt me consistently, and the entity didn't leave. I would wake up with bruises, strange scrapes, and it wouldn't have been there, and even a bite once. It was hard to come to terms with these things that were happening, and I felt like being hunted. My roommate saw it on several occasions, and so did other people, stating that the apartment was freezing constantly and it reeked of something rotting. The mold began to grow on the walls and the hinges of the doors and the vents. It was everywhere, and my roommate and I just left. We moved out 9 months after living there, and she got a better job. Our second apartment was great, and it was in the city, nearly 30 miles from the thing that haunted us. We were doing good, had a nice home and good finances finally, and things were looking up. Eventually, though, my mom had come to stay with us due to her having to move apartments. She had an old bugs and unsavory things, and worst of all was the story that my sister told me about a woman in a bloodied dress with matted hair who stood in her stairwell at night and whispered her how she liked to kill families. It terrifies me. I was beginning to think there was no end in sight of these things. I told her not to worry about it, and that if we fear things, it gives them power over us, something my grandmother had always told me growing up. But these things wouldn't go away. A year after we moved into the second apartment, we were moving out. Rats, black widow spiders, mold, peeling floors, rotting walls, you name it. It happened. We both started getting sick, and we saw the other thing again, standing in the fireplace. My heart sank when that happened. Eventually, my mom and siblings moved into a townhome that they were renting, and my roommate and I moved into an apartment even further away from my hometown, but still in the same state. We now live almost an hour away from where we grew up, and while that particular entity hasn't shown up, save one time, other things have happened. My sleep paralysis went through the roof, and nightmares were drowning or burning alive, things I fear the most. The entity stalking me, and the corpse sitting at the foot of my bed, talking about things that were too rushed and whispered for me to make out. Though something told me I didn't want to know what it was, and then that was the good ghost. A nurse who walks around at night, peering into our rooms to check on us. She's warm and kind and feels like something safe and compassionate. A stark contrast to whatever has been hunting us. We now have 2 dogs and a cat. Our apartment is small, and we're seeking a house within the next year. But during the pandemic in 2020, my sister told me about a ghost who was in a trash bag and sits in the kitchen at their place. She came over and was there in the middle of the night. A visible shadow appeared on our walls 2 weeks later, and my roommate and I swore things were trying to come out of it. We heard the nurse spirit walking around the apartment again, and occasionally we'd hear a very soft bell ringing at night. The shadow was gone a few days later. She also seemed to have come with a cat spirit, which played with my own cat at night, and we could hear 2 cats running around and meowing sometimes. The trash bag ghost was seen by our mom and other siblings, but seems to have left them alone now. I still think about all this, and it scares me to consider what might happen if it comes back. Thanks to my friends who have come from different religions and backgrounds coming together to pray for our safety, and one of my Wiccan friends sent me a big bag of protection herbs. I have Bibles in our house tucked away safely for needs, and I keep salt by my windowsills, a thing my mom told me to do, and dream catchers on both bedrooms. Some friends of mine who are of different belief systems have given us things to help with protecting our home, and as of 2024, we have minimal to no entities in our apartment and have lived there for nearly 3 years. Things have been exceptionally well so far, with the few things we have happened of not being scary or worth worrying about. I've seen it at least twice now, and I can never come close. We don't talk about it openly, just to be safe. You're welcome to not believe me or claim I'm bringing it upon myself somehow or anything else. I honestly don't know how people have opinions about the story. For you, it can be just that, a story. But let me leave you with something my grandmother always used to say. Once you are aware of the supernatural, it is always be aware of you. That is fascinating. That is a deep, dark, situational story there. And there's a lot going on there. But I hope they're doing well. Wish them the best of luck. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.